Since the beginning of agriculture, we've had a relationship with grains. Our ability to grow them is not the limiting factor. I think the limiting factor is likely our ability to have that relationship with certain grains and apply that to our systems and learn.
In this episode of Voices from the Field, Audrey Kolde, a sustainable agriculture specialist with the National Center for Appropriate Technology, talks with Iriel Edwards, the farmer and owner of the Dancing Radicle Farm in Alexandria, Louisiana. Iriel is also a Certifier and Regional Organizer with the Real Organic Project. Prior to starting her own farm, she managed Jubilee Justice's 5-acre organic farm in Alexandria and worked with Black farming communities in the Southeast. Audrey and Iriel discuss the challenges and potential of small-scale grain farming, particularly farming Louisiana rice. They delve into the necessary components for small-scale success, including community involvement and cooperative models, inspiring us to embrace innovation and collaboration toward a brighter future. Let's listen.
Hey y'all, I'm Audrey Kolde, a Sustainable Ag Specialist for the National Center for Appropriate Technology. I'm based in the Gulf States, and we're here with Iriel Edwards, who works for Real Organic Project as an inspector. It's a fantastic organization trying to bring integrity to the organic label, and we have a previous podcast with the Real Organic that we'll link in the show notes if you want to learn more about them. But today we're here talking with Iriel and her work in central Louisiana as a farmer, where she's grown grains and is a seed farmer, and most notably a woman trying to transform our system into a more equitable place. How's it going?
Hello. It's going great. Beautiful day. Happy to be here to talk about grains.
Yes. Oh, we appreciate it. For listeners, just me and Iriel got to farm together very briefly last year at Jubilee Justice, where she was the farm manager for 3 years, and I got to see her kick butt with everything she was doing out there and her passion and her knowledge and how much that grounded her. So I am so grateful that you're here today, and I'm excited to talk about Southern grains as well. And I just want to start this off, like, why do you think that grains, and especially small-scale grains, belong in that conversations that are happening all over the country with sustainable agriculture and things like that?
Well, there are so many reasons why grain is important in the conversation of sustainable ag and small-scale agriculture. One of them is that, a large majority of our American diet consists of grains, maybe a little bit more than it should be, too. But when you look at who is growing those grains, who is sort of in charge of that global market, and the scale at which they're grown, it's a very inaccessible, looking from the, like the biggest view, it seems to be a pretty inaccessible crop for small scale growers to grow. However, when we're thinking about community sovereignty and being able to provide for our local food systems, grain have to play a role in that in order for us to be able to, satiate our bodies. And even, as we experienced in COVID, this disruption of our global food system, if that continues to occur in the future, how are we as producers, as a community, able to, pick up the slack in which we're relying on that global system to provide for us? So that's the main reason why I think grains are important. And then even zooming in from that, I think, especially like the world of grasses is incredibly diverse, and an opportunity to integrate that into so many different production systems, I think, is important in terms of, considering how we diversify our soil health and our production systems, or even adding value to our our market base, our equipment, and so forth. And as I mentioned before, in terms of grain being such a large part of our diet, there's so few grains that are a part of it and very few varieties within that too. So grain is also an opportunity to just increase our nutritional intake in general.
Ooh.
But it's an entire world. It's a huge world. There's so much opportunity there. And I love, thinking about these regional grain economies and systems and how that relates to community building outside of the typical cultural landscape of grain at the moment, which is very, very monopolized.
You need like a broker most of the time, I think about. And like, I know in Louisiana, a lot of our large scale grain operations, they have brokers that are selling them. It's not direct to consumers. And so it is that definitely speaks to like the difficulty of entry and like the scale that often you have to be able to compete at whenever you're starting out. So small scale, definitely you're able to do that direct to consumer, which we love in the food system and in our farmers markets, and really able to source locally. Yeah, and I think about the Midwest, the breadbasket of, the United States, and those very few grains that you're talking about that are part of our diet. And you and I are here in central Louisiana, so a very different climate in a lot of ways. Water, heat, lack of snow. Um, are the grains that we consume as like Southerners and like are able to grow, is there a lot of variety in that, in comparison to that like monolith of five grains that we consume most of the time,
I mean, being in the South, we have a much longer season and warmer, hotter climate. I think just push warm to the side. It's hot. It is very hot climate. And because of that, we do have a much wider diversity of grains to grow. Many of them are more common, for example, rice, although there is I think rice is becoming more of a conversation in more places, even the Midwest. I just saw recently through the Artisan Grain Collaborative that I think Wisconsin, 2018 was the first commercially harvested rice that came out of the state, and it was grown by Hmong farmers who have essentially migrated from Vietnam. So they've sort of pushed the fold of more alternative warm season grains in northern climates. And here in the South, we have more flexibility with stuff like that. And say even, sorghums or millets or what are called pseudo cereals. So maybe not a grass, but a crop that is treated like a grain, like buckwheat or sesame. And because of that, there's such a wide range of opportunity. And at the same time, a lot of that information regarding those, wheat and corn, or even just around thinking in terms of localized grain economies, a lot of that information is coming from other regions rather than here in the Delta South. So I think there's opportunity to learn from those other regions. And at the same time, our unique circumstances can provide a lot of information to those other regions as well.
And I mean, that's a story I feel like that is repeated across a lot of agriculture, where the Delta South has so much bounty to give and so much future, hopefully, and we're still figuring out what information we can move forward with here in, the Gulf, what information we need to still access, and learning that from our history, and those seed varieties that are very specific. Is there any like overplay right now you can think of your side of like seed farming and also grain farming, as far as just like varieties you're excited about, or seed sources that you're pumped to hopefully get to work with and things like that?
So since I've been growing grain on a small scale, I constantly have people reaching out to me asking for seed, because especially when you're a small scale grower, maybe you're buying from some typical seed companies in the South that might be Southern Seed Exposure or So True, High Mowing Seed, or Working Food, shout out to them. Yet those companies are, a lot of their customers are growing on a smaller scale or even gardeners. So it can be hard to access grain varieties. So the seed availability, especially as we think about heirloom grains, is pretty inaccessible at the moment, because so much research is being, especially when it comes to breeding work, is going into commercial varieties and that industrialized grain system. And so, although despite that, there are still a lot of really cool varieties and folks who are pushing the fold when it comes to reinvigorating heritage varieties or crops that were grown before Green Revolution, World War II, when we really started industrializing our agricultural system. And many of those are linked in history and ancestry and heritage, and the economic viability of those is built on reinvigorating that culture that existed before it became nearly extinct or on the brink of being able to access. So a lot of folks, especially in the rice world, have heard about Carolina Gold and its connection to some of the first plantations in the US and South Carolina, and how that really laid a foundation for our economy as a country, to alternative grains that were also brought over, but maybe not grown as much anymore, like sorghums or millets, or even varieties of corn. But up to now, the seeds that I've worked with have mostly come from the USDA. I specifically the Dale Bumpers Rice Research Station. Anna McClung, who's now retired, was aware of out of all of the seeds that the government has collected, those ones that are still sitting in the vault waiting to be brought into the marketplace. So I think, engagement with research stations is always an opportunity for accessing seed, especially since I found that researchers are really excited when there's opportunity to apply their research to the real world. And I think just knowing that it's really an incredible opportunity for growers to be at the forefront of the reinvigoration of those varieties and development of those varieties, so that they are up to date with our current climate conditions and are relevant to our markets or what we prefer taste wise. So yeah, that's kind of what I think about variety wise.
Oh my gosh, it's so fun. Oh,
so
sorry.
fun. There's so many questions and opportunities. It's huge. It's huge.
Yeah, no, again, it's super exciting to get to hear about it. And I feel like that's just a whole nother conversation.
I think since the beginning of agriculture, we've had a relationship with grains. Our ability to grow them is not the limiting factor. I think it's the limiting factor is likely our ability to have that relationship with certain grains and apply that to our systems and learn how they can help our businesses and our food system in the modern age without relying on, especially if, anchor institutions like universities aren't developing that, then when would a farmer find the time, besides maybe a little plot in their backyard, which everyone should be doing, but
if you can find the seeds.
If you can find the seeds, yes. But in terms of pests in general and more of those climate considerations, there are some grains that are harder to do in the South. For example, we have a very mild and wet winter. And because of that, things like wheat or some of the grains domesticated in maybe like mountainous like Caucasus Mountain regions or higher altitudes might not do so well here, considering our humid and warm conditions. So I've had issues with fungal diseases on certain wheats, or Fusarium head blight is really big, which is essentially a fungal disease of that head of grain. There's also issues with winter grains in particular, sort of this sprouting that can occur once those, because there's seeds that are exposed to the environment, so with them being exposed, if they get wet and they're mature and you haven't harvested them yet, they can start sprouting on the plant, which lowers the quality, to even torrential downpours being common here in the wintertime and how that might affect exposed pollen on a grain. So all of those climate reasons can make it difficult to grow grain. Pest-wise, ones that are more common, I would say in all regions, are birds. Birds are, as a rice farmer, I found, and an avid bird lover and bird watcher, I've found birds to be the biggest pest, but there are ways to overcome that. Being in the South, we might have different times where birds are migrating through our area, through our state. So considering that can be a way of accommodating how that's how that affects us versus other regions.
I never thought about that, of taking into account migration and things like that. That's so cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I'll just, to get into the specifics, that's both during harvest and during seeding, because I've definitely been there with even grains or a cover crop, planting it right when huge flocks of birds are migrating through, and they will just pick those seeds straight out of the ground.
They love it. They're like, oh,
they love it.
Free lunch.
I mean, it's bird food. It is.
Yeah.
It is typically bird food. So.
Yeah, and we do have some resources at ATTRA pertaining to like small scale grains, disease, and insect and weeds. I think a lot of it is general like crop management, rotation and cover crops and things like that to decrease that the weed seed bed and things like that. But definitely worth a check out if you're struggling with those weeds, because it's really hard, from my thinking, that most of the time as a vegetable farmer, your weeds, if they're grasses, you're like, okay, there's things I can do. Whenever you're a grass farmer, of some sort of grain, you're looking at grass and it's a completely different beast as well. So I often think about that when it comes to grains, just from my history of vegetable farming, is I'm like, oh yeah, you have everything you would do that would kill a grass, can't do. And so you have to do that specific. I know you've gotten to go travel around and see lots of farms in your time at Jubilee Justice and with Real Organic. Are there any techniques or IPM plans that you've gotten to see through that, and that are only achievable because people are doing grains at small scales? If you had 100 acres of grains, you wouldn't be able to really implement this form of IPM, but because you're keeping it 10 acres or whatever your small scale is, you're able to really use some of that crossover in between small scale productions.
Yeah. What a good question. I love that question. Yeah. To reiterate, what techniques for pest or weed management can be used on a small scale that are unique to a small scale versus a large scale. I would say the first thing that I think about is probably a more diverse crop rotation, especially if you're working with vegetables. And I think that can play a huge role in both feeding your soil, in preparation for grains, or even there being opportunity to lessen your maybe tillage passes, or have a crop like some kind of smothering crop in the vegetable world, maybe sweet potatoes or watermelon, that's prepping your soil for there to be less weed pressure with grains. And grains can be can play that role vice versa. There are plenty of vegetable growers that will grow rye as a cover crop and use that as a mulch. So all of that could be considered within what's unique to a small scale. The role of tillage is huge. Small scale growers can work with, I think, more tools than larger scale growers can when it comes to tillage, especially in the organic space. So that's the thing. And also, being less mechanized, you have more opportunity to do things like intercropping, which can support your plant. It can create a more diverse mix of whatever you're harvesting too. I've seen some folks, it's actually more of a historical practice, but some current growers have taken it on where they're growing out mixes of a bunch of different grains together and harvesting together and marketing them together, or even milling them together to change the qualities of different flours, flour for baking. So all of that, I think, could be easier to do on a small scale.
Yeah. Yeah. No, again, it's the idea of intercropping, which we love so much, and using that is really great. And I love the idea of also like rotating more heavily your crop rotation, because you're not taking up your entire land to where you need to do like winter peas and wheat, that you are able to change those crops around a little bit as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And you're not limited by, well, it depends. I think even on a small scale, 10 acres, you're going to have some level of mechanization. And as you mechanize, you realize how you become more and more limited, unless you're a great farm hacker and you figure out a way to make it do what you want it to do, which is definitely possible. But even on the smaller scale, I think I've seen a lot of people bring back equipment that was used in the 40s, or stuff that's, on the woodland line, or like pieces of equipment that people have ditched, and reinvigorating those, which can make that scale of farming more achievable, because then you're not buying a piece of equipment that's thousands of dollars. Maybe you find something. I know folks who have found stuff on Facebook Marketplace for, $300 that'll do what they need it to do. So that relationship there is pretty interesting. The other benefit to a small scale potentially is, I think, when you're working on a smaller scale, you can become more intimate with the different sections of your land versus maybe working with a much larger swath. And because of that, there's more opportunity maybe to, rather than being limited to growing one thing over a larger area, being more specific about what you're growing where. For example, in wetter areas or drier areas, or maybe places that get more sun or less, or protected. And I think smaller scale farmers are able to tune into those details a little more easily. And that's kind of like a general opportunity across all crops. No. Anyway.
Yeah. No, again, being observers of your land and your microbiome in the fields, right? I feel like that's one of the like permaculture starting points, is observing. I often think about like weed inventories, like understanding what weeds you are dealing with, not just so you can identify them, but to know and be able to research what long-term actions you can take. Because oftentimes, soapbox definitely, but like oftentimes you can't eradicate a weed system in 1 year. It's going to take 5 to 10 years to like really be able to remove that seed bed from your biome. And so I love that. Yeah, getting able to really be observant of every spot that you're still planting and growing those grains. Yeah.
Learn how to harvest the sun twice with practical information at NCAT's AgriSolar Clearinghouse. Get access to more than 400 peer-reviewed articles, the latest in agri-solar news, and connect with farmers and solar developers who are working together to make the most out of our shared resources. We'll see you at agrisolarclearinghouse.org.
I also think that small-scale grains have another opportunity as far as like markets. Did you get to see very much of that, or do you get to see very much of that in your world view and like getting to work in the food system with grains?
Yes, there are so many market opportunities there, and so many market opportunities beyond selling it into the global grain supply chain. I know one of our first sales at Jubilee Justice was to Brooklyn Brewery for a small batch of beer sold at a beer festival. So there's opportunity there for microbreweries or distillers. I've seen folks do that direct to market and invest in being able to independently mill or process grains. Even with Jubilee Justice, we were doing that same thing, but in a cooperative way. And what's really great about grains too is every part of the grain is valuable beyond just the edible seed itself. You could, plenty of folks are selling off straw. Down here, I would love access to some organic straw that I could use in the vegetable production that doesn't have broadleaf herbicides in it that would prevent me from being able to grow vegetables. So that straw could be extremely valuable. Bran or any husks for garden inputs, to even depending on what your relationship is with your markets, how you could even utilize their own waste. For example, with breweries, any spent grain or grain that's already been fermented. I know folks who have composted it. I'm not sure about alcohol, being used for alcohol, but potentially animal feed. So all that's available. And then it goes beyond there. Local bakeries, connecting with chefs and getting them involved, to tortilla makers, to so many different outlets market-wise. And like I had mentioned before, there's opportunity for the story. And because of our deep relationship with grains over time, and that really being a common feature in anybody's ancestral line, there's so much story to be integrated with how you market, why you're growing a specific grain, and your relationship to it. And people, I think we're in a time where that even just that relationship, people want to steward your ability to have that relationship with plants. So those are kind of some of the main things I see there. Yeah.
No. And I think like, I feel like there is also, depending on where you are in the country, I feel like maybe it's Chicago also has like small scale grain cooperatives where they're trying to get restaurants and breweries in the entire city to like shop locally, right? Because that is still a driving force in the marketplace. I feel like in Louisiana, I know where like buying local is something that is very desirable. That's why so many of our breweries and things, you buy local rice and buy Louisiana sugar and things like that. So it is a huge driving force for sure. And you also get into those really niche markets. I think there's the Italian, or at least I know it's from the like origins are from Italy, where they burn the grains in the field and then harvest them, and like that gives like a completely different flavor profile and nuttiness and a beautiful dough as well that's like green and rocky and gray. So you get that's like some high level top shelf things that are usually being done in the United States but are being done just culinarily across the world because they have these small grain operations and are able to do that. Yeah, there's so many opportunities, but
so many opportunities, and it's all in community. I think in order to access those, it's about learning who's in your community, what they're doing, what they're interested in, and knowing that none of this can happen just because of one person. That's inherent to grains. Community is inherent to grains. Not one person can do every step without understanding who's around them and how we support each other, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah, because I think of the stories of community harvest days and things like that for grain. The history of that, of feeding the community and working together with the community. What are there any other like challenges that you think is important or anything like that?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges that I could see with grains, especially for smaller scale growers, is again the image of what it takes to be able to grow grain and being able to acquire that knowledge, the knowledge and capital for certain resources to make it economically viable. Because this is a conversation about what the potential is, but it's still incredibly difficult to grow grow grain on a small scale and have that be economically viable for you if your community isn't already uplifting that type of marketplace or economy or that capacity. So even when I think for myself or talk to other people about how we could grow grains as a young, low resource farmer with little access to land, and I can't, buy a whole milling facility. And within those questions, it does require a lot of creative thinking. And I think that creates a pretty steep learning curve just because it hasn't been so prevalent in our conversations as much as it could be up to now. So processing and storage can be a big challenge. Although since I've moved more into exploring seed production beyond grains, it is very similar. And I do see seeds, contracting seeds, or selling seeds in the community. I do see that as a viable business model for small scale growers. And so sometimes I think about how that integrates with grains, especially as a lot of small scale growers are selling to seed companies that are targeting gardeners, or target isn't the right word, but supplying gardeners. So that's one thing. But I think overcoming that all comes in community and thinking about how we work cooperatively. Depending on how you plant it, like what's the relationship of a community coming together, planting it, helping to harvest it, and sharing in that bounty? How do we integrate that back into our culture as farmers to how isolating being a grain farmer can be, and how that plays a role in apprenticing farmers within their terms of what young farmers are demanding for that lifestyle? No, I think there's a lot of shift in lifestyle that needs to happen too. Because of that, a challenge that I see, maybe I should hold on to this for later, but because there isn't a clear path for this quite yet, and it's being developed as we consider the future, I encourage folks who are interested in this, or some part of it does need to be some advocacy around it, because it's pushing the fold as you're building that. So if that makes any sense.
Oh yeah,
if you want to be a grain farmer, speak up about it. Like if that's something that just realizing how much opportunity there is for that. We need greater access to land then, or we need greater support for cooperative development. And it's a challenge for a farmer who's really busy to be involved in that. but it isn't. I see that as a very necessary part when you're thinking about it holistically, and being present in the community for some farmers, including myself, sometimes can seem like an additional job beyond just making sure things are planted and harvested and processed fully and stored correctly and marketed.
It's the beauty and the curse of small scale agriculture.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Absolutely.
There's a level of community integration. The reason you're doing small scale is to provide food to your community, but that requires community engagement sometimes to a certain extent.
Absolutely. And it has
really,
to.
Yeah. And we want that. We want that we want that to be the case for our communities, to be engaged in where their food comes from,
Right.
Which really brings me to a little bit of a pivot that I did want to touch on your work in the local food system. This past fall, you gave an incredible talk on your farmer story at the Real Organics fundraiser, and we can link that also in the show notes. It's on podcast or YouTube. And in it, you mentioned the Young Farmer Coalition survey. And I just wanted to delve a little bit into that. And one of their findings was that farmers today are motivated overwhelmingly by environmental regeneration, anti-racism, and social justice. And I just wanted to pick your brain a little bit on how you connect with that motivation as why you're farming today.
Yes. My connection to that is farming is the foundation of farming is practice. And my connection to farming is that when I'm actively seeding something or harvesting the results or learning about or adding to my soil, it feels productive in a way that nothing else does. And I think that farming today is calling to a lot of young people because it gives this feeling of agency in a time where a lot of stuff is changing and a lot of systems are changing or maybe moving in a direction that doesn't feel fully supportive of local communities, of rural communities. And so I find that finding incredibly important to talk about because it demonstrates, especially as we think about this crisis of farmers aging out and knowing that our society is built off of farmers. I think it's first encouraging to see that young people are coming back to farming, wanting to make greater change beyond it just being a business, which is what our system is designed for farming to function as. And it's a call to policymakers or those who have the power to make that change to support those young people, because they are looking to play that, they're looking to take on that huge role in a way that is fairer and progressing us in ways that we need to, outside of what's been typical and has been destroying our food system and our communities and our relationship across difference. So yeah, it excites me. And I, as a young person, I think about my future often. And it's been so important for me to be around other young people interested in agriculture because it gives me hope in a time when things are changing rapidly, socially, climate-wise. And I hear people say it all the time, especially older generations, like, I hope in the young people, you guys are gonna take it on and, but I think that it is true and important to show and to demonstrate that this next generation is looking to change agriculture in a way outside of how it's been working now. And I think that change is ready to happen and has been ready to happen for a while.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And that's really it's a powerful thing that we get to work towards in our food system. And then just a final note, do you have any call to actions, especially, thinking our audience is farmers, for our farming audience and the people who are the stewards of the land and the knowledge as well, and how we can build a better future for the next generation of farmers.
Yes, so many calls to action. Some calls to action would be to get involved politically if you can, however you can. If there are organizations around you who, you Google, you see that they're associated with that, ask them questions about what's going on. The Farm Bill is about to, we're in the process of a new Farm Bill. How will that affect you? Being involved in that process is incredibly important. It is a huge piece of legislation, and it's all about, we need to make sure as farmers that those types of bills and that moving of that funding is supporting us. So be involved. People want to hear what you have to say. They really do. I would also say find ways to experiment. And if you don't have the capacity to do it as a farmer, see if there are young people around you looking for land. Could they lease a small part? See what questions they're asking and what they're experimenting with. And I always feel like there needs to be more cross-generational conversations, especially in agriculture. And I would also say, I think it's important moving forward in agriculture, in every region, in every crop production system, for us to be thinking about how we work formally in a cooperative sense and really transforming our agricultural system towards working more cooperatively. And I think that that's the future of agriculture. And my call to action is to consider that and to research it and see how you can be a part of that.
Yeah, Iriel, I had such a fun conversation with you today. It was so awesome to get to talk about that small scale grain, the potential that we have here, as well as one of the other things I just feel like was coursing through it was that community basis that small scale agriculture has at its core, and the fact that it is small scale grain is so doable for us here if we have that community to work with and support each other. And so I really appreciate you being here today and all the awesomeness that you got to share with us.
Thank you. I was so happy to be here and to share it. And I just want to say, if anybody listening would like to reach out to me, they can reach me, or you can maybe put my contact information in the description. But I'm happy to talk to anybody who is interested in learning more, or maybe they have knowledge or experience or resources that they want to share, or looking for thought partners. So absolutely.
Thank you.
That's it for this episode. Thanks for listening. Additional information about this episode and related resources can be found at attra.ncat.org. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe to Voices from the Field wherever you get your podcasts. I'm your host, Rich Myers. ATTRA, Voices from the Field, is produced by the National Center for Appropriate Technology, headquartered in Butte, Montana. It's supported by the USDA Rural Business Cooperative Service as part of NCAT's ATTRA Sustainable Agriculture program. Any opinions, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this recording are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of the USDA or NCAT. We'll catch you again next week, and until then, keep on farming.